So Erik Karlsson has finally been traded, and it's not to the Hurricanes. Caleb Jones is now signed with the Hurricanes to put them at a grand total of 9 defensemen, and it looks like that PNC Arena might finally get some renovations. We're going to talk about that and a whole lot more on this week's episode of Warning Take Weekly. Hey everybody, so I didn't do a weekly show last week because I was waiting on some stuff to move, and we've got a whole lot of content for this week, which I'm really happy about. I can put a good, nice, long-form show together here. So I'm going to start it out with some shout-outs, then we're going to go to the comment replies, and then we're going to get to the news. The topics today include Caleb Jones signing, Erik Karlsson's trade to the Penguins and how it may affect the Hurricanes moving a couple of their defensemen out, PNC Arena renovations that could be happening, an extended lease, and the land around the arena getting further developed, and we'll touch on the small topic of the minor league trade that the Hurricanes made, in which the Hurricanes acquired David Kasha. Okay, so the first thing I want to do here, I didn't get permission from the guy who posted this tweet, so I took his name out of it, but I do want to show y'all some other Hurricanes like podcasters and guys who have shows related to the Hurricanes. If you go on Twitter, I'm still going to call it Twitter, I'm sorry, it's always going to be Twitter to me, you can look for these right here. The Surgecast, Colin Home Ice, Stormcellar97, the Caniac Report, and Caniac Sessions. I've actually really been listening to Caniac Sessions quite a bit lately, and I've really enjoyed it. So I wanted to give those guys a shout out, and I want there to be other entertainment options when it comes to the team. Now, I have several reasons for this. One, I don't like the current broadcast media that goes on around the league. I'm not talking about Mike, Shane, Tripp, and Hannah. I'm just talking about like ESPN, TNT. Don't even get me started on Eddie Olczyk. But basically, traditional sports media, I think, is getting rivaled now by people who have the ability to make their own content. And when anybody makes their own content, I think it's great to promote it, because then you get a more diverse array of options of who you want to listen to talk about sports ball. So I wanted to give all these guys a shout out. If by chance you watch my show, go give them a look. And, you know, you might find some more entertaining stuff over there that you like too, because more than anything, I just want to promote the Hurricanes brand, bring in new fans to the team. The team's doing really well. The fan base is growing. The game itself in the South has grown exponentially. So I just wanted to give these guys a shout out and go give them a look. Like I said, in particular, I've been listening to Caniac Sessions a lot lately. All these guys are producing good stuff, and if they get more fans, then it'll continue to improve. So just a quick shout out to them. Next, I want to give a shout out to my buddy Todd. I told him I'd give him a shout out like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I just straight up forgot about it. So, Todd, hi Todd. Additionally, I would like to give a shout out to his twin brother Brett, and he'll understand the reference in the photo below. But now we're going to move on to the comment replies. Alright, so the first one we got on the docket today is from Graham390. Thank you for the comment. He says, good looking dog, is his name Boom. So my dog's name is actually Frank. It was originally Frank, I should say, and it just kind of turned into Frankie over time because it's more dog-like in my opinion. So when I adopted him, I got him from a shelter. They said he was a year and a month old, but then like I woke up one morning and he was 50 pounds instead of 36. He didn't have the short stubby legs no more. The pigmentation on his face had changed and all of his puppy fat was gone, and he was 50 pounds when I took him to the vet the next time after that, and I was like, oh, okay. So long story short, his name was Frank when I got him. And I was like, you know what, you look like a Frank, so till this day he remains Frank. He has several nicknames, the primary one being Pigeon, because when he whimpers he kind of sounds like a little pigeon, and I just like to call people pigeons. I also like to call inanimate objects pigeons at times. It's just, for some reason I love that word, pigeon. It's a cool word to me. Graham, thank you very much for the comment. This was in response to the Aho video I put out recently, and this comment is from Jersey Sean. Thank you very much for the comment. And this is like this is a really intuitive one. I like it too. Aho is already at 468 points through 520 regular season games played. By the end of the extension he just signed, he'll be way over 1,000 games played and most likely 1,000 career points as well. There is a good chance he wins a few cups, possibly a Conn Smythe during that time. Barring any injuries, he's well on his way to a Hall of Fame career. Given the market he plays in, what do you think that his odds of winning any sort of individual awards are? Like you said, since 2018-19 he has led the league in shorthanded goals, but even after this fantastic year he finished a criminal 28th in Selke voting, 1 4th place vote, 2 5th place votes. Austin Matthews managed to get a 2nd place vote and finished 14 places above Aho, and their defensive ability is nowhere close. I couldn't agree more with your last sentence there. Sebastian Aho is one of the most criminally underrated players in the league, to the point I've seen people say that he's not even a top 30 forward in the league. And I could go on for hours about why I disagree with that notion. So I'm going to go answer this one by one. Yes, I think Aho will have at least 1,000 points. I would say 12, because his playing career more than likely will not be over after this extension. I can see him staying with the Hurricanes for even longer than that, or at least playing hockey longer than that, but he is the franchise player now. It's not Eric Stahl anymore. It is Aho. He is well on his way to having every single franchise record. So, in my opinion, had there not been the stoppage in 2020, the shortened season in 2021, even if you don't account for, like, let's say he still has the same injuries and everything like that, he would have already eclipsed 500 points, in my opinion. So that's the only reason he's sitting at 468, along with the fact that he's become such a defense-first player. And that was one of the reasons why I highlighted in that video that I thought that he was like a modern Rod Brind'Amour, but he has a separate scoring touch, and that's also something else I'm going to talk about with another comment that I'm going to be covering here in a few after I'm done with yours. But now, as far as individual awards that he will win, he was making a Conn Smythe case for himself had the Hurricanes made it to the finals. However, Jordan Martinook went off. Like, the dude, especially in the second round, I've never seen him score so much. And you can't count on him doing something like that again, but it would be really cool to see it again. However, in the case with Aho, he definitely is someone who has Conn Smythe potential. I would say the two awards that he has the best chance of winning, I'll say three, but the third one is going to be a distant third, would be in this order. The Selke, I think he will win multiple ones of those. Conn Smythe, he definitely could get a Conn Smythe, because people joke about him being no-show Aho, but he's a point-per-game player in the playoffs, and his defensive acumen is just as good, if not better, in the playoffs as it is in the regular season. And then third most likely would be a Lady Byng, but I think that the possibility of that is going to diminish over the next few seasons, because I've noticed that Aho has gotten a lot more physical, and he's taken a lot less stuff off of people after the whistle. He's not like a full-on baby rattlesnake, but he's getting a little rough at times, which, you know, I don't like seeing him do that, just because I don't want him to punch somebody and break his hand and be out for 6 weeks or something. But at the same time, though, Aho is definitely someone who is starting to develop a physical edge. It's never going to be his primary attribute or anything like that, but he's definitely increased his physicality. So I would say Selke's, if there's any justice in the world, if the criteria for the voting is ever enforced in a fair manner, he will definitely get at least 2 or 3, I would imagine. And it's weird that he finished better in the Selke voting than he did this season, when I felt like the 3 seasons he had prior, he was even better. Now, here's one thing that I find really funny. There's a lot of people in the crowd saying, well, why does it matter so much that defensemen have a lot of points in the Norris voting, even if they're not the most competent defenseman? But that's typically, I'm finding out, the same crowd that'll say shorthanded goals shouldn't be that big of a factor in someone receiving an award, including the Selke, even though I can't think of a traffic cone of a forward that would get 3-4 shorthanded goals a season like Aho does, or having power play goals scored against him typically when he's on the ice. Across the board, the award criteria to me has kind of seemed a little bit more biased in the last few years than I think that it ever has been. Particularly, I would say the Norris and the Selke are two awards that are becoming far more popularity related than they are based on much of anything else. And by extension, the Hockey Hall of Fame has become more biased than it ever has been, and it's always been kind of a bias. So here's where I'm going to piss some people off. For example, with Brind'Amour not being able to get in the Hockey Hall of Fame, it's criminal on its own, but the fact that they put Pierre Turgeon in it, and I'm sorry, Pierre Turgeon is one of the softest players in the history of the game. He was incredibly skilled. Someone like him would fit in a lot better today, but for the time frame that he played in, he was incredibly soft, and he disappeared in the playoffs to the point where someone wrote a book trying to say that he wasn't soft, disappearing in the playoffs. Him being in there over Brind'Amour is absolutely criminal, and Aho not being a finalist for the Selke at maybe not this season, but in my opinion the 3 prior seasons, is absolutely ludicrous. As far as Aho's concerned, I think it's going to take him holding a cup over his head before people realize, 1, how good he is, and 2, before he does get considered for the Conn Smythe or the Selke or anything like that. Now, as far as the Conn Smythe is concerned, there has been a few times where it's been awarded to the player on the losing team in the Stanley Cup Finals. The last guy to do that in 2003 was Jean-Sébastien Giguère, and I don't think it'll ever happen again in this day and age because the internet is so prevalent now, and the amount of outrage that would go from casual fans and part-time fans saying, how does someone on the losing team get the MVP for the playoffs, and it would just cause too much of a headache today, so I don't think it would happen even in that case. But Selke, Conn Smythe, totally possible. Lady Bing, distant third. As far as something like the Hart or the Art Ross, it's not that he's not capable of scoring that many points. He's more concerned with playing a sound 200-foot game as he has been, and he wants to keep that going. And that's the only reason I think that he'll never, get to McDavid, Draisaitl, Matthews, McKinnon type of levels with points. It's not that he doesn't have the potential to do it, it's just he concerns himself with all three zones, not just the offensive zone. Not saying that those guys don't do things defensively, but none of them measure to Aho defensively, in my opinion. I would say that those three awards are the only ones that I think that he's ever going to get. Jersey Sean, thank you very much for the comment. I appreciate it and hope you keep coming back. So our next comment here is from Bless and Deliver. He says, I am relatively new to hockey, but this was an excellent analysis warning take. Thank you. In your opinion, are there any particular similarities in Brind'Amour and Aho's offensive games? I know you discussed the overall similarities of their respective 200-foot games, but I was wondering if Brind'Amour and Aho had anything more in common offensively. Thanks. So, first off, excellent question. In my opinion, Aho's offensive game is not any different than it would have been had you not had Brind'Amour in the equation, other than the fact that he creates more scoring chances because of his defense, particularly what he does when he has good defensive positioning, and this applies to 5-on-5 penalty killing, and in some cases even, breaking out on power plays after the other team clears it down to the other end. Aho already kind of had the offense when he came in. That's what got him drafted. That's what got him drafted pretty high in the second round, being 35th overall, was his scoring ability and secondarily his playmaking ability. So there was a quote at one point in the video where Aho basically says he didn't really teach me anything on offense. He basically just taught me defense. With Aho, the offense was already there. And basically, Brind'Amour took that foundation and he built a defensive game, which did add to his game overall, where he is doing so well as far as scoring shorthanded goes. And the good defensive positioning he has, as I showed in the highlights at the end of that video, his really good defensive positioning is creating a lot of turnovers in the offensive zone. And more than anything, it sets him up to be able to create separation when he regains possession of the puck and he catches defensemen flat-footed, and when he's gone, he's gone. So, personally, I don't see much of a similarity there. The thing that made me notice the similarity between Aho and Brind'Amour actually started in the 2019-2020 shortened season. I'm sitting there watching them play. I remember exactly what game this was now. I had to go through some old text messages just now. I did that real quick just to make sure I knew exactly what I was talking about here. But the night that Svechnikov scored the first lacrosse goal, the Hurricanes before that, they were completely flaccid. They were playing like absolute garbage. Like, I'm not even going to hold you. They just sucked that night until that happened. And then Svechnikov got that lacrosse goal on the power play. The one thing that was going pretty good that night is Aho was playing great defense, and my dad pointed it out. He said, Aho's really stepped up defense. That poke check was amazing, because I think he got back on, I want to say it was Michael Backlund, he got back on and, broke up a good 2-on-1 play before he had a chance to pass it or something like that. And then, that kind of got my gears turning. I'm like, you know what, that makes sense. His defensive game has come a long way. But then I started seeing him do a lot of the same stuff Brind'Amour did, as far as the way he was angling guys off to prevent them from being able to break out of the zone. And instead of him hitting people, normally he just uses the stick, because he uses the longest allowable one for his height. The way that he just angles people off and takes the puck away and everything like that, it definitely looked like the way that Brind'Amour used to do it, minus the physical aspect of it. He's more likely just to execute a takeaway as opposed to hitting somebody to separate them from the puck. But as far as the positioning goes, as far as reading when to forecheck, when to press, but when to play an angle instead, when to force a guy to go below the goal line, or maybe let him go for a second and then stick lift him at the perfect time at the blue line and force him to go offside, all that definitely looks like Brind'Amour to me. Aho, I think the scoring came in on his own. However, what you've told me here has definitely prompted me. Eventually, I will make a video where I break down Aho's offensive game, because I think it's a completely different monster compared to what he does when he doesn't have the puck. So essentially, the Sebastian Aho, a Modern Rod Brind'Amour video highlights what Aho does when he does not have the puck, and what Aho does when he regains possession of the puck after making a good defensive play, and how that attributes to him making individual effort goals, and particularly how proficient it has made him shorthanded. So that video will come along eventually. Thank you very much for the comment. I appreciate it. So the next comment here is from RJ Haney 2614. He says, when the Canes signed Orlov, something that I saw flying kind of off people's radars was that the contract Orlov signed runs out at the same time Nikishin's does. The Hurricanes basically guaranteed themselves a physical Russian lefty with offensive skill will be on their blue line for the next 5 years minimum. Yeah, absolutely. So there was actually one other user, and I want to say it was the third time that I did the weekly show, that pointed out that it looked like that Orlov's contract is basically stopgap until Nikishin can get over here. And the cool thing about it is if something does hold up Nikishin from getting over here, you've at least given yourself time to find another option. You could extend Orlov. There's plenty of options there. But yeah, so the thing with the Hurricanes is they do have a system, even though they don't have a... I wouldn't say Brind'Amour is a systems coach. I would say he's definitely more of a player coach. But they do have a system. They do have a certain type of player that they look for. They do have certain metrics that I think that they look at as far as filling the defensive depth chart and everything like that. And one thing where it was lacking in was physicality. You had plenty of it with Shea, which I think he's going to get traded at some point or another. But Orlov was definitely the guy that was brought in to add more of that physical edge. Like when Waddell said the stuff at the end of season press conference and the exit interviews and everything about we would like to get a little heavier if possible. And from what I understand, the Hurricanes didn't call Orlov. Orlov called the Hurricanes. Or, his agent did. So they did, in fact, add that physicality that they needed. They added a left-handed shot. They got the best free agent that was available this year, even though the free agent market was kind of weak. But yeah, if Orlov goes or takes a reduced role in a couple of years, then Nikishin is right there to come in, barring any sort of geopolitical ramifications that would keep him from getting here. But I think Nikishin is going to be kind of a Kaprizov type of situation. Eventually he will get over here. And that is one thing that I am really, really looking forward to, is when Nikishin gets over here, because that kid is an absolute animal, dude. It's unreal how good he is all the way around the game. He is definitely a complete defenseman. I definitely think Orlov is a lot like that. Orlov replacing Shea is basically you're getting an upgrade in every category of the game that each of them excel in. But Orlov is basically a more well-rounded defenseman who is everything Brady Shea does and a little bit better in every aspect of that. So RJ Haney, thank you very much for the comment. I hope you keep watching the show. Alright, so that Edmund guy is back again. Good to see you. He says, Jeff Skinner is 68 games away from 1,000, so he think he finally makes the playoffs for the first time this upcoming season. So initially when you gave me this question, I replied to it, and I was like, let me give this some thought. And I gave it a lot of thought, and here's what I think. Short answer, yes. I think the Sabres ultimately end their playoff drought. Now, me trying to have a show here that is something that fans of every team could watch, I'll safely say this. Anybody who's been a Hurricanes fan from 2006 or earlier probably still doesn't like the Sabres because of how brutal the Eastern Conference Finals was and all the vitriol that the fans have kind of thrown back and forth ever since then in a lot of cases. I think he does that this year. So as far as teams changing from being bubble teams, contenders, and teams that are going to be below the cut line, I think the Atlantic Division is going to have a lot of movement in that regard. Particularly, I think Ottawa and Buffalo are going to be the two teams that really take that next step finally. I think that they're kind of in the same position now that the Hurricanes were at the end of like the 2018 season, where you're like, okay, you know that they're there, you know they can take that next step. They just haven't done it yet, but you know that they can do it. So I do think that this is the year where Buffalo definitely does that. I think Ottawa makes the playoffs this year. For the sake of doing a little bit of a mock, standings as far as the Atlantic goes, I know that this was said last year, but I think there's a lot more cause to believe it this year. I don't think the Bruins are going to make the playoffs. If they do, they'll be wild card too. I think that they're at the end. Their core is old. Krejci and Bergeron just both retired. Their center depth is depleted. 3 of the biggest pieces they acquired at the deadline have all went and signed elsewhere, being Garnett Hathaway, Tyler Bertuzzi, and of course Dmitry Orlov being with the Hurricanes now. I think that they decline. Tampa's core is aging. I think that they'll be on the bubble, if not below the cut line. I think that this is that season where Ottawa and Buffalo could both realistically compete to be in a wild card spot or be third in the Atlantic, in my opinion. So I do think Jeff Skinner finally does play a playoff game this year. Yes. Thank you very much for the comment. I appreciate that. And I've got one more here from you that I'm going to do next, actually. So the other one we have here from that Edmund guy, long story short, worn on ice, made in Canada, produced by Fanatics, made in Sweatshop. So that's in regards to the video I made detailing the difference between the made in Canada sweaters and the ones that you buy like at the Eye or that you buy from Carolina Pro Shop or somewhere like that. So I didn't exactly like how that video landed because I went back and watched it a couple of days after I published it, and I was like, okay, I'm not really digging how that one went as far as my presentation of it and everything, because there were a couple of big details I actually forgot to mention with that. That was the first time that I've ever done it in the whole, standing up and showing the sweater, and I had the webcam positioned differently, and the lighting was all messed up. I didn't like how that landed at all. So eventually I'm going to do a take 2 of that and try and do a little bit better of a job, maybe get one of my buddies to come help me and film it or something like that to make it a little bit more coherent, because I looked at that and I really was disappointed in myself with that video. 2 big things I forgot to mention with that. One, so there's the 3 different kinds. There's the Fanatic breakaway ones, which are the replica ones, which come in sizes of like medium, large, extra large, everything like that, and they are not anything like the on ice product at all. And I've heard horror stories about people who have those, because I've only got 2 or 3 of the replica ones, and they're all the Reebok or CCM ones. I've heard horror stories about them falling apart in the washing machine and stuff, to the point where, shout out to my buddy Matt, if you get to watch the show this week, they that's why they call them breakaway, because all the stuff breaks away from them when you wash them. So, yeah, that what you're saying is completely accurate. And then another big difference with those, the made in Indonesia authentic ones that have the fight strap and the elbow extensions but aren't the same ones they wear on the ice, is though the sizes in those come in like 46, 48, 52, 54, etc. The actual traditional hockey sweater sizing that's based off of European sizing. So that's one thing that the authentics from the Sweatshop and the made in Canada Pro Stock ones have in common, is how they're sized. So yeah, I'm sorry, that video and my one about the idea for an alternative to the EA Sports video games, I didn't really like how either one of those landed. So whenever I talk about those topics further, I'm definitely going to change up how I do it, because neither one of them were satisfactory in my opinion, and I don't blame anybody for not watching those. That was me trying to expand my content, and it didn't exactly land the way that I wanted it to. Either way, Edmund guy, I appreciate it. You're always making good comments here. Thank you very much. The Huge Caniac, welcome back again. Thank you. So he says, hockey season can't get here any sooner. Any plans on the channel for the regular season? Really enjoying the content. Okay, so the regular season, there's going to be a lot more stuff in the regular season. The biggest difference for the weekly show in the regular season, my plans for the weekly show essentially is talk about the games from last week, so that'll typically be 3 or 4, and then talk about the upcoming 3 or 4 games, maybe do like a big monthly preview, and of course talk about like big relevant news, like if there's any trades, injuries, all that type of stuff. The documentaries and analytical videos and everything like that, documentaries that I've got planned, and I have a bunch of them, like the essay part of them written already. I just have to make the videos and everything like that. And when I get to editing, I get kind of meticulous about stuff. That's why I'm kind of disappointed in the 2 videos before the Aho one that I recently put out. Those will be more for an off-season thing. The regular season, basically, I'm planning on doing the weekly show where I talk about the previous few games and the next few games as aforementioned. I'll do like little short analytical videos and everything like that. I'll post some highlights. Like there was one that I posted when I was learning how to screen capture and everything of a really good 5-on-3 kill that the Hurricanes had against the Rangers. So there will be a lot of little stuff like that and everything. Like I might do some quick analysis videos. I might find some like little 5-minute sequence of play to break down what an individual player does. One thing I wanted to do as far as analytical videos, I want to analyze matchups. Like one thing that I have planned is I'm going to pick a couple of different sample sizes, but this is just an example. But let's say I want to compare all the time on ice that you can see on camera between Jacob Slavin and Connor McDavid, or Jacob Slavin and Nathan McKinnon, or something along those lines. I want to do that during the season as well. So there will be more stuff during the season and more frequent, maybe a little bit shorter videos and everything like that, but a lot more content. The weekly show will be a little bit more streamlined to be a little bit more current events based. But Huge Caniac, thank you very much for the comment, and tell Trip Tracy I said hi. Matt Field 7497, welcome back. Thanks for the continued top-notch content, bud. You are welcome. Question not necessarily related to this video. With as much as the Sharks seem to want for Karlsson, should we even be holding out hope to land him? Our front office has become one of the most savvy and least inclined to overpay. Is landing EK65 a pipe dream at this point? And he really what we need anyway, since we already have offense on the blue line with Burns, Orlov, and TDA. So, despite the fact that the trade has already happened with him going to Pittsburgh, good question. This is still relevant, and this is actually how I'm going to segue into the next segment of the show, is this question. So, here's what I think was going on with the Hurricanes and the idea of acquiring Erik Karlsson. I think they had a continuum with it. If you can, I think phase one of it was, if you can get him cheap enough, take him, and then sort everything else out from there. If you can't get him cheaper, you can at least create a bidding war between other teams, make them burn assets, and that's less that they have to use against you in the future, whether it be on the ice or in the trade market or in the free agency market. Either way, you handicap them. In my opinion, that's where they were at. It was more psychological and economic warfare than anything on the part of the Hurricanes front office, because it was kind of a catch-22 as far as the Hurricanes pursuing Erik Karlsson, because on one hand, it's like, okay, going after Erik Karlsson makes perfect sense for the Hurricanes. They're a contender, and their lack of scoring is the only reason that they didn't go to the Stanley Cup Finals. And on the other hand, it makes absolutely no sense because of how stacked the blue line already is. So, more than anything, I think that was them throwing their name in there to drive up the market so that teams spent more assets, because the Hurricanes core is still really young. Aho just turned 26. Svechnikov, I think, is 22. KK, I think, is also 22. And then with the idea of guys like Morrow and Nikishin coming up, Caleb Jones, who just signed, is going to be a viable third-pair defenseman, even though he's not someone you keep long-term. Chatty's only 27, I think. So it's like the Hurricanes have all this youth intact and everything. It made 100% sense, yet 0 sense at the same time for them to pursue someone like Erik Karlsson, even at the point he's at in his career, and even with him more than likely not replicating the season he just had. So if I had to take a guess, they never actually were in on him. But this does lead me to the next part of the show, where we're going to talk about the Hurricanes having 9 defensemen, what's going to happen to at least 2 of them potentially, and what the defensive pairings could look like once that's all said and done. Thanks again, Matt. I appreciate you coming in and making comments. You guys that have all made comments have always made really good comments, and I really love reading them and answering the questions, and it gets my gears turning too. It helps me think of things for the channel. It helps me think of content. It helps me think of subject matter. So thank you very much. Keep giving me comments. Give me criticisms too. If you have any criticisms of any of my other videos, let me know, because I'm still learning. You guys put other sets of eyeballs on this, and I start figuring out some new stuff. So let me start by saying, I am very glad the Hurricanes did not make this deal. Pittsburgh's style of play, it makes a lot more sense for someone like Erik Karlsson to go there than it would for him to come to Carolina. And honestly, as big of a trade as this is, it's also like, I feel like I'm looking at a calculus problem with it sometimes. And the Hurricanes, even with the abundance of defensemen they have now, they're still in a position where they could make a 1-for-1 trade to bring a forward back in if they move Pesce, Shea, or even Chatfield out. And we're going to talk about all that here in a little bit. Or one thing I'm kind of hoping does happen, even though I really don't want Brett Pesce to leave. As you can see, he's in the background of the show. I really like him. He's one of my favorite players ever. I would absolutely hate to see this happen from the standpoint of me liking Brett Pesce, but if you trade him and Shea as a pair, you're basically trading a ready-made defensive pair to a team. The return you could get on that is significantly better and significantly less complicated, potentially, than what the Penguins have gotten here. Now, in my opinion, with this trade, the biggest winner here is San Jose, just because they shed that salary. I think their primary objective here was to get rid of as much of, if not all of, Erik Karlsson's contract, and they managed to get it down to where they're only retaining $1.5 million, and that's going to be peanuts in a few years. That opens up room for them to have viable salaries, that they can sign some young guys as they draft them that they decide they want to keep long term and everything like that. The biggest reason I had to discuss this trade is because, 1, I don't think Erik Karlsson was ever coming here in the first place, and 2, I don't think he would have been a good fit, but 3, the biggest thing is him moving now. I think the front office was probably already getting a ton of phone calls on Pesce and Shea. With Erik Karlsson moving, the front office is getting even more calls, and I think particularly more so on Shea than they are on Pesce. Reason being is because Shea is definitely more of a puck mover than Pesce, even though Pesce's a righty like Erik Karlsson is. Shea's more of a puck mover. Shea's more likely to score, and he just had a career year in terms of the all-around game, but he had 19 goals that really stood out, and he coaches challenge away from 20. So I think that since Erik Karlsson has now definitively moved, if there were any other teams in on him, they're now looking at Brady Skjei. The defensive market was basically waiting on Erik Karlsson to move, particularly teams that were looking to add blue line scoring was waiting on Erik Karlsson to move before they went and looked at, okay, who else is out there, and Brady Skjei is probably the guy that's on top of the list as far as defensemen who have a scoring touch now. He would not be as easy to move as Jalen Chatfield, who has no trade protection whatsoever, but he would be easier to move than Pesce because Skjei only has a 10-team no-trade clause, whereas Pesce has a 15-team no-trade clause. In my opinion, the big winner here is San Jose. They managed to shed $10 million off of an $11.5 million contract, so they're the big winners here in my opinion. As far as this making the Penguins better, this is where I'm going to disagree with a lot of the experts and pundits and everything like that. I don't think it really moves the needle for them at all. The difference between Erik Karlsson and someone like Brett Pesce, you can put Brett Pesce on any team in the National Hockey League, and it becomes better immediately. As far as penalty killing, the ability to, reduce shot suppression 5-on-5, goals against 5-on-5, all that type of stuff improves automatically when you put Brett Pesce on any team in the NHL. Erik Karlsson adds scoring to anybody right off the hop, but he adds defensive liabilities, as does someone like, say, Tony DeAngelo, but Tony DeAngelo is not going to be playing the same minutes, and we already had a solution to blue line scoring, Bernsey, Orlov, and Tony. So here's one thing where I disagree with a lot of people. Having someone who scores that much, whether they're a forward or a defenseman, is helpful. However, having someone who scores that much also can become redundant, and you're paying a guy $11.5 million to do something that 2 or 3 players could do for about the same price, and unless all 3 of them get injured at the same time, you don't lose all that production if that person goes down with an injury, or you don't lose all that production if one of them, hits a rough patch or falls off a little bit and, maybe gets his minutes reduced and everything like that. A lot of times, a contract like the one Erik Karlsson has, even though Pittsburgh's not taking on the whole thing, incurs a lot of risk, and that's even before you're talking about the fact that Erik Karlsson said this himself, the reason his defensive game had kind of taken a step back was they basically removed like half of his ankle bone when he had that, I want to say it was an Achilles tear or something like that. I'd have to go look it up to be absolutely sure, but I don't think the Penguins got better, no. So when I'm going to compare the defenses, even with the recent transactions where Pittsburgh is getting Erik Karlsson and we just added Caleb Jones to an already like super stacked blue line, I would not change this lineup or any potential combination of it to acquire Erik Karlsson. Because with every single combination here, and I'm going to get into this a little bit further in the next segment, every single combination here is really good. Every single potential combination here is really good. Now, the coolest part about this is even though you're going to have to replace some guys and get some guys extended, of which I think Slavin's gonna get the bag. I think he's going to get like 8 years, $8 million. Maybe not 8-year term, but I definitely think he's an $8 million defenseman just because of how good he is at what he does, and there's not many players like him anymore. So you'll notice here the top 3 defensemen listed are Dmitry Orlov, Jacob Slavin, and Brent Burns. That is your top 3 defensemen, definitively. If you keep the top pair intact, Slavin, Bernsey, and then Orlov is the left-handed guy on the second pair, and, then you've got multiple options of who could be on the right. Orlov is defensively competent enough to where, or he could be with Brent Burns, and then you have a really lethal shooting combination from the point, and 2 guys who are competent defensively, but they're not as good as like Slavin or Pesce, but they can, force somebody wide and force them into a corner and lay the body on them and be physical. Let's say you even reunite the Jacob Slavin and Tony DeAngelo pair and mix everything up below that. First 3 defensemen you have available after that are still Brent Burns, Dmitry Orlov, and depending on who they keep, either Brett Pesce, Brady Skjei, or Jalen Chatfield, and then you have Caleb Jones there to anchor the third pair on the left side. This defense on its own, even if you want to factor in the 2 guys who have the most offensive acumen, which are probably Burns and Orlov, if you're talking about who's going to be utilized more 5-on-5, that's already worth more than Erik Karlsson, in my opinion. This defense is as close to perfect as you're going to get in the modern era, where one guy's a safety valve and one guy's a puck mover, more offensive-minded. Now, to contrast that with the Penguins' defense, now that they've added Erik Karlsson, their defense takes up 32.4% of their cap. The Hurricanes essentially don't have a first, second, and third pair. They basically have two top pairs and a really good second pair for a third pair. Yeah, you've got a good puck-moving 1-2 punch with Erik Karlsson and Chris Letang and everything like that on the right side, but I just don't see this working out that well for them. But they know that they're at the end of the window. Crosby's getting old, Letang's getting old, Malkin's getting old, so they're trying to, they're trying to stay competitive for as long as they can, and then they're going to have to go into a really big rebuild. That's one of the reasons I like the way the Hurricanes are doing their salary structure, how they're being careful about what types of contracts that they hand out and everything like that, because the Hurricanes can be competitive in perpetuity for a very long time. So, in my opinion, the Hurricanes did the right thing leaving Erik Karlsson alone, because you're taking on way more salary. Yeah, you're getting a ton of blue line production, but it gets to the point where it's redundant and you don't need that much. Okay, so shout out to Ryan Hinkle over at the Hockey News. I thought this was a really cool article he did just to break down some possible defensive pairs that you have. Now, this is before Caleb Jones got acquired that this article came out. I wanted to cover it last week, but I didn't have the show last week. So this is not accounting for Caleb Jones, but we're going to get to him in the next segment. This is just to kind of fuel like what the team could look like when training camp starts. I don't think all these guys are going to be here. So essentially the first combination he has here, Slavin Bernsey, Shea Pesce, Orlov and Chatfield, Tony DeAngelo and Dylan Coghlan being the healthy extras. I don't see that happening because you don't pay a guy $1.6 million to be the healthy extra, especially from the get-go. Now, maybe if you acquire somebody else at the deadline and you have the extra defenseman making $1.6 million and hanging out being the seventh guy in the press box and everything, that's one thing. Out of everyone on here, Shea, Pesce, and Chatfield, I think, are the ones that are potentially tradable. Like I said before, Chatfield would be the easiest guy to move, but you'd get the smallest return. Shea would be the second easiest guy to move with a middle-of-the-road return. Pesce, hardest guy to move, best return. I think that Pesce is who they're going to try to move, because you can put Shea on the third pair with DeAngelo, or you could put him there with Chatfield. Shea and DeAngelo together would be interesting because they played a few preseason games like that with the Rangers, and I asked a buddy of mine who's a Rangers fan who said that he didn't think it worked very well, but we'll see. I don't see that particularly happening. So projected pairings with... So another option, projected pairings, if you move Shea out, you have Slavin, Bernsey, Orlov, and Pesce, Chatfield and DeAngelo, Coghlan being the healthy extra guy. Like that's a great defense too. That's the best defense in the league probably, even with the second option there, even if you move Shea out. And like I said, with Erik Karlsson being off the board now, Shea is going to get a lot of looks because he's a defenseman who can score, and if anybody is trying to have someone fill that role on their roster, Shea is definitely a good option. So then the third combination here is if you move Brett Pesce out, Slavin Burns stays intact, Orlov, DeAngelo for a second pair. That one I'd be kind of iffy about personally. Both of those guys are more puck movers, and they're both super physical and everything. But one of them I definitely don't see DeAngelo being a safety valve for Orlov. And Orlov needs to have a little bit of a safety valve with him, but he's not as liable to turnovers as Tony DeAngelo is. I think that pair would get walked in certain situations playing against certain teams, so I don't think that would be a good idea. I mean, barring injuries and you have to move stuff around, I think that it would work, but I think that there's a lot better combinations there, even if you do move Pesce out. I think that it would be better to have Chatfield with Orlov in that situation, so that way Dmitry Orlov can do his physical stuff. He can pinch. He likes to lay the body on people when he pinches along the boards and everything like that. So you'd have Jalen Chatfield, who is a viable safety valve there to cover up in the event of odd man rushes and everything like that. So that one I would stay away from personally. That's just me. This is an interesting combination here, but I can also see the appeal of it. Slavin and DeAngelo getting back together. Orlov and Bernsey. Lethal shooting combination, ton of physicality on the second pair. It might have a little bit of the drawbacks that I was talking about with projected pairing C second pair there. Shea and Pesce being the third pair. Wow. That would be nuts. But then Chatfield and Coghlan being the healthy extra. Chatfield has proved that he's not a guy that needs to be the healthy extra, and on almost any other team, he's at least on a second pair guy. I don't see that one happening personally. As cool as the Slavin and D'Angelo thing was, I think D'Angelo settling into a third pair role with having someone like Caleb Jones that the Hurricanes have now acquired would work out pretty well, actually. A lot of people were kind of down on Caleb Jones, but I think he performed incredibly well in Chicago despite how bad that roster was. And he was playing second pair minutes there, whereas with the Hurricanes, he'd be playing third pair minutes. So kind of the same situation as D'Angelo. He will perform better with less minutes in a system that I think would favor his style of play more. All right, so here's how I see Caleb Jones fitting in. He got signed in for just a little above league minimum. He's at $775,000. So this is a great deal for him and the Hurricanes both. He's going to go to a team that has great defense. He can prove that, you know, his kind of under-the-radar performance in Chicago was not a fluke and everything like that. So he's got a little bit more potential there as far as having a scoring touch, but essentially he's going to fill the same role for the Hurricanes that Calvin DeHaan did before, and he would be a viable safety valve for Tony DeAngelo, or if you did bring back the Slavin and DeAngelo pair, someone like him would go just fine with Brent Burns. It looks like the way the Hurricanes are trying to build their defense that essentially the minutes 5-on-5 are going to be carved up almost evenly between all three pairs, and then they would be applied differently on the penalty kill, for example. You know, you're not going to see Slavin, Pesce, and at least not for a while, you're not going to see Chatfield on the power play, but you will see Burnsy, you will see Orlov, you will see Tony, but then you go over to the penalty killing side of thing, and then you have Slavin, and you have Pesce and or Chatfield, Shea if he's still here, everything like that. Kind of dividing up the ice time 5-on-5, almost as close to 33% for all three pairs, all three defensive pairs as you can get. So biggest thing is, I think this move is further indicative of the Hurricanes are getting more phone calls now than they were before, since Erik Karlsson's no longer an option. Alright guys, this is actually being recorded at a different time of night than the rest of the show. So I just wanted to finish up here with the last little bits of news I wanted to get in. So I went out for dinner, and then I went and skated, and then I came home, and now I'm going to finish up the show. So the next three things are not really, really big, extensive topics and everything. One of them kind of is, but it's going to get its own video potentially, depending on what happens with it. The next two segments are not those things. I'm going to talk about that a little bit at the end. So basically, David Kasha, who is in fact related to Andre Kasha, their brothers, has been acquired by the Hurricanes in exchange for Massimo Rizzo and a fifth-round pick. So this package actually was originally what was going to be traded for Tony DeAngelo, and I think that this is the Hurricanes just following through on their agreement and keeping a good relationship with the Flyers. That could pay dividends down the line if we're looking at someone like Travis Konechny. So when it comes to Kasha himself, Kasha's really a depth piece. He's a potential depth forward, but he's not played in North America since 2021. He's been back overseas playing in the Czech Republic. And more than anything, he's only played 7 NHL games, so I'm not expecting the Hurricanes to call him up at any point unless they really, really need a depth guy and the depth chart for whatever reason is depleted. I don't think that it's going to get to that point, though. But you can never have too much organizational depth, and that's basically what he adds here. And that also probably negated any malarkey that the league might engage in regarding the Hurricanes making a trade retroactively after Tony DeAngelo was bought out. So, good depth move, just adding a little organizational depth. There's not a whole lot to see in regards to this one. So this right here is some good news. I did watch this segment on NHL Network for a little bit. So Don Waddell, he was talking about Andrei Svechnikov. He says he wants to be playing today, but will be cautious. Obviously, October is important, but as the season goes on, it becomes even more important. I fully expect him to be ready when the season starts. Svechnikov being in or out of the equation, the Hurricanes do need to add some more firepower up front. Svechnikov coming back will be a colossal win for this team. However, you don't want to rush it either. ACL tears are something it's a very hard thing to come back from. Nowadays, you've got a lot more options medically, and technology has gotten better, treatment has gotten better, so the likeliness of an ACL being something incredibly detrimental to somebody's career is a lot lower than it used to be. However, it's still something that you have to be very cautious with. So if we don't see Svechnikov on opening night, it's a small price to pay to make sure that he's healthy later on in the season, because like I said, I have no reason to believe that the Hurricanes will not be competing to be first in the division again. The teams that would challenge the Hurricanes the most on that would be the Devils, maybe the Rangers, and depending on how much of a real bounce back they could have, maybe the Capitals. But For the most part, I think that it's going to be between the Canes and the Devils, and that's going to be something that I would imagine is not decided until the last week of the season, just like it was this past season. So, no point in rushing him back. The Hurricanes will be fine without him. They won 2 playoff series without him. They won several regular season games without him, but it will be nice to have him back, but no need to rush him. All right, so the last thing we're going to discuss here, this is what I was saying, that this is something that's going to get its own video as the story develops and everything like that. So there's been this push over the last few years to renovate PNC Arena. So there's a lot of good to this, but there's a couple of drawbacks to it in my opinion. One of the majesties of PNC Arena is the fact that it has a parking lot, and it's got a bunch of closer parking options around it. That's why it's so revered and so well known for all the tailgating that goes on around PNC Arena. So, truth be told, I've never got to go to a PNC Arena tailgate, but I went to a bunch of them at the Crown Coliseum when I was a kid, and tailgating at a hockey game, it's a really cool tradition that I definitely see happen seemingly more in the South. I went to a bunch of Fayetteville Fire Ants games where people were tailgating, and the tailgating culture of Hurricanes fans is incredibly well known. So, the one big drawback here, you're looking at them building a parking garage, and I don't know if they would regulate how much people can do grilling and what they can do in regards to how much space they can take up for tailgating and all that stuff. I don't know how much different that would be. One thing that having a parking garage would hopefully help with, if they do allow the tailgating to continue, they would be able to have trash cans all over the place, so that would be less work for the blue collar guys to have to do. So in that regard, I'm for it. I'm hoping that the tailgating can still keep going and everything. That's a plan that me, my dad, and a bunch of other people have for this year. We're definitely going to do some tailgating this time around because we just haven't been able to do it, and because, like I said, I don't live in North Carolina anymore. That's one thing that would be really good about it. You could have a bunch more trash cans. You could potentially have more parking if you do have to build a parking garage, if you do have to build a parking deck. Now, like I said, I don't know what the drawback would be as far as if they would say, hey, you can't be grilling here unless you're at the very top or something like that. I don't necessarily foresee that happening, but there will be some space constraints if they build a parking garage. Now, here's the good thing about that. This apparently right here is also an initiative to be able, for the Hurricanes to be able to develop the land around PNC Arena. So basically the only thing that you have there that's within walking distance, as far as I know anyway, and I've only been there twice, is Backyard Bistro. And Backyard Bistro is a cool place, but it would be nice to have some variety that's within walking distance of PNC Arena, and then the renovations for the actual facility itself would be really nice. Now, one of the things that I've noticed is different about PNC Arena as opposed to a lot of other NHL arenas, the lower bowl actually has a ton of seating in it. I don't know if there's a lower bowl at any other venue in the NHL that has that many rows, and everyone I know who's ever sat in the 200 said that that's a really cool experience too. Or this is going to be a really good economic move for Wake County and everything like that. Not to mention improve the fan experience, and that's one thing that the current front office has went out of their way to do in the last few seasons, is improve the fan experience, because I think we all know for a while it wasn't very good. So adding some more bars, adding some more restaurants, maybe adding a little bit better of a transportation system, like, you know, maybe shuttle buses or something like that, or to ferry people from these various venues to the arena and everything like that to make it a little bit easier for everyone. That could be really awesome. Like I said, the parking deck thing, I'm a little iffy about that, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. This is something I'm going to be following, and like I said, depending on how it develops, I'm going to do like an individual video about it, because if it does end up going through and everything like that, there will be like plenty of like concept art and Google Maps images and stuff like that that's going to say, hey, this is what restaurants we're going to put here, what bars we're going to put here, what maybe you get another separate like merchandise shop that's bigger than the Eye, because if you've ever been in the Eye on a crowded game day, it's kind of hard to look around in there and not accidentally run other people over and everything like that. So it would be cool if they built like another merchandise venue kind of away from PNC Arena as well. So there's a multitude of really cool things that they could do with that, and I'm going to be following that. So one thing I would like for y'all to do in the comments section, the development area that they want to have around PNC Arena, tell me what type of stuff you want to see, bars, restaurants, pro shops, anything like that. Let me know what you think, because I would say a Bojangles, but there's actually one already pretty close, and I'm still surprised that there's not a Bojangles in PNC Arena itself yet, but bunch of cool stuff to think about. Alright guys, so that's going to do it for the weekly show this week. I do have some plans for getting a couple of videos out this week and everything like that. I'm going to try to anyway. It's just with work and everything, it's going to be really complicated. And come Friday, I have a really busy day, and I'm skating again like 2 or 3 times a week now, and I've got some more GoPro footage that's going to go up here in the near future and everything like that. I've received a lot of feedback and a lot of comments lately. I really appreciate all that, and keep sending it to me, and I'll keep replying to it as often as I can with the weekly show and everything like that. We're getting close to the season starting. We're getting closer to training camp, so we're going to have a lot more subject matter to talk about. Thank you all very much for the support. I really appreciate it. I'm just under 100 subs now, and I'm looking forward to continuing to making good stuff and improving what I already make. Thank you very much, and y'all have a good day.